I'd like to begin by saying a warm welcome to Catherine Parry. Catherine is the founder and CEO of DeepView. Joining, we have George Ralph. George is managing director at RFA and has spoken widely on this topic and is a domain expert. We have Nicolas Gaussel. Nicolas is the CEO of Metori Capital, and rounding off the panel, we have Michael Lawson. Mike is the Chief Information Officer at Corbin Capital Partners. So we have a very nice split between the US and the UK and Europe. Catherine, I'll start with getting a very quick introduction from yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, James. So I am currently sitting in Los Angeles, over in the US. The DeepView is a platform that helps secure chat channels, LinkedIn, WhatsApp by recording and alerting to data leaks, as well as video conferencing like Zoom and so on. So whiteboards in the background, it's alerted to. So information that shouldn't be shared isn't shared.
Fantastic. Very relevant. Thank you very much, Catherine. Look forward to getting your thoughts on that. George.
Yeah, knowing that Catherine was on the call, I'm strategically sitting in front of my whiteboard.
Thanks, George. Which is well polished and clean, yeah.
Obviously, unused. I'm the MD and CRO for RFA. I have quite a long-standing background in cyber auditing and due diligence, which is hopefully why I'm on the panel today. And for those of you who don't know RFA, we act as the CTO and CISO for funds, but also deliver everything that they're responsible for, and really act as an advisory body to the sector.
Excellent. Thank you very much, George. Nicolas, nice to see you.
Hi, so Nicolas Gaussel. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Metori Capital Management. We're a pure play quantitative fund manager, hedge fund manager. We're based in Paris. We manage close to €1 billion, and our specialty is in managed futures. So we have entities in Paris, a subsidiary in China, and some offices in the US.
Brilliant. And Michael, great to have you on board.
Thank you. So I'm Mike Lawson, the Chief Information Officer at Corbin Capital. We're a $8 billion fund-to-funds credit shop based in New York. I've got about 25 years of experience in just hedge fund technology, running various teams, infrastructure development, and business applications.
Well, it's great to have you all on board today, and looking forward to doing this discussion over the next 45-50 minutes. And just to set the scene, I was looking earlier at just really how the industry is looking at some of the predictions on how cyber risk could play out over 2021. And I was just going to one lead organization. Basically, they were outlining one of their trends for this year. No surprise, it's COVID related. And the fact that organizations really are going to need to better secure their distributed networks and how they use the cloud and how the data within the cloud is protected. Now, in their view, that will mean automating threat prevention and really, plugging the gaps in any weaknesses that they may have in their networks to stop these cyber attacks that have become very prevalent as actors and really look to exploit this remote working environment. I also then point out that automating prevention, which we'll come to later in this discussion, will be critical over the next 12 months and beyond. So I just wanted to set the scene there for how we may explore this. I want to start just looking back over the last 15 months. you've maybe been providing advice and support to your clients as they've had to navigate the new risks that have emerged as a result of this remote working environment, and really what you've seen and heard from your clients globally there.
No, it's a good question. And it seems to have evolved during a period of time. You know, the questions and advice we were giving at the beginning has changed a bit. I think because so many people expected it to be quite a short stint in this working environment, and it's just sort of dragged out, and things have changed and risks have grown. But I think the key areas initially for us were things like BCP planning, quite heavily from a regulatory perspective. You know, if we're in BCP, do we need to update our BCP plans to the new working environment? So sort of business compliance, regulatory process questions. And then obviously the next stage was about decentralized security. When people realized they were going to be in that environment for quite a long period of time, it wasn't necessarily thinking about home working. It was more about, look, we need to get into mindset of we now have lots of satellite offices. We need to take some responsibility on behalf of our staff. How are we going to secure their home networks? Are we allowed to get involved in securing their home networks? Do we just give advice? So there's quite a lot of back and forth around that. Then it got heavily into data centralization. And that for us has been a huge growth area in our business, building data warehouses for people to give them greater insight into the data and also people's behavior. And then insider threats. You know, you can't have a glass of water by the kitchen or a cup of coffee and work out whether someone's not happy in their job. So standard tools like antivirus are less relevant these days. You need behavioral analysis. You need to look at how the data is being used, the behavior of your users with that data, so you can try and proactively prevent bad actors, you know, bad levers, insider threats, that kind of thing. That's been another area.
Yeah.
And then I think the last point is probably around automation. So many people have realized the number of manual processes they have in the business that just don't work when you're not in the same room or the same office. And so there's been a lot of automation technologies and advice that we've been giving, implementing tools. I mean, Microsoft Flow in the Office 365 stack has been a fantastic tool for smaller firms who can't afford standard automation. So key areas like that, and then, you know, education of cyber risk, because phishing attacks have been on the rise so heavily. Those are the main points, I think.
Yeah, I will. That's great. That's a great place to kick off, and I'll come back to phishing attacks in a while. But maybe I could get, Michael, from you a sense of how Corbin Capital have been approaching the whole kind of exercise, remaining, you know, as secure as possible, and whether you've had to evolve your tech infrastructure at all, really, over the last 15 months.
Absolutely. You know, I think right before the pandemic, we had started really on our mission to just simplify. You know, we moved all of our locally managed data centers into the cloud, which really helped us reduce our technical support load. It also improved our security platform in general. I took an approach last year that really mirrors our investment strategy, where we just outsource to talented partners who bring targeted expertise to the table, especially in the cyber and cloud support functions. We partner with a solid MSP for engineering and 24/7 support. And I take a multi-tiered approach towards cyber monitoring and protection. We have a 24/7 MDR firm that we use. We also use their SIM platform, so we have all of our signals from the infrastructure feeding into that. And also use a next-gen endpoint protection with threat response. One thing I didn't want to do is really be in a situation where I didn't have a team readily available to deal with, you know, any event that could arise. As we've all seen with SolarWinds and other incidents out there, you know, I don't think we could all rely on any type of corporate solution that might be out there, or a commercially viable product. And also we use all the protections, obviously, in a Microsoft suite of, you know, basic virus threat and data loss protect tools around that. The partners that we tend to look for do offer AI in their offerings, which I think is extremely important. To echo kind of what George said too, this really helps us get our arms around the myriad of alerts and signals that happen, and we look for those patterns. And what these tools tend to do is really rise up the things you should be looking at, and really kind of helps you filter in on the important things. So I feel that we have a good visibility now into real-time events.
Yeah, very good point, because this is arguably going to become even more important. Really, firms prioritize, what those key risks are, and this is an ever evolving. It's never going to end. Things are only going to become more and more sophisticated as we continue to work. And yeah, I'm sure using any kind of AI related tools that can help really that kind of mechanism to technology risk. I'm sure will make a huge difference to all, not just hedge funds, of course. Nick,
absolutely.
It was last 15 months. Stay slightly smaller firm than Corbin, but nevertheless something that I'm sure has been a big priority for you as well.
Of course, we founded Metori 4 years ago, and most of us came from a large bank, Societe Generale, and so we had that prior experience, of heavy system legacy, and we made a move at the time which was perceived as bold, which was to put everything in a cloud infrastructure. When I say that, it was bold because we had to make it validated by the French authorities, AMF. And it was not obvious to them that you could run an asset management business fully cloud-based infrastructure, but they accepted it, and that massively paid off, I would say, because we were surprised that, as George mentioned, we ran BCP simulation for just half a day sometime, and it became a massive BCP for 1 year and a half, basically. But what was very surprising to us is that, we live in Paris, so we were used to strikes and people, possibly standing at the door and preventing you from entering into your premises. So this was our central scenario. And but eventually, one day, we just couldn't enter into the premises. And since we had that cloud-based infrastructure, we discovered, at a surprise, to be honest, that we could run the company from the outside without anybody inside, and without even the electricity put up in our premises. So it was a first surprise. It was working, for real, for days. We could, managed connect with, peers, our back office, brokers, and everybody. So all this was working. So it was a very positive surprise. But having said that, that massive remote access, both by employees and partners, we realized that very quickly that it was putting cybersecurity at the very forefront of our, I would say, concerns, because you have to open more your infrastructure. You have to control it a little bit less because you are in emergency mode, and then so after 1 or 2 months of that mode, we really, I would say, focused more and more on cybersecurity, and we're still doing so in trying to really assess what kind of new risk were created and how to identify them and treat them.
Nick, a few things you've there that get into in a little bit more detail. I'm going to move to and bring Catherine in here at this stage. Just want to get a sense from as well, all the businesses have increasingly adopted the use of cloud environments. That's made a huge difference in maintaining business as usual during the lockdown that we've all been going through. Many benefits, but it has introduced some pretty novel risks, certainly in respect to how organizations communicate internally with their clients. Give us a sense of the type of work you've been doing, Catherine, and what you see as the ongoing risk environment, really, from a communication point of view.
Okay, thank you, James. So one of the biggest trends we saw, and this was, I think, George's point about the evolution through the pandemic is spot on. The initial thing that became very prevalent was the increased use in chat channels like WhatsApp. So WhatsApp use went up 40% during March of 2020. And that was people being at home, being away from their colleagues, wanting to talk, and also just talk to friends, family, and so on. And then with that, there likely will have been an increase in LinkedIn and similar. So what risks do they give? Well, of course, under the FCA's adoption of MiFID II, CISC 10A, all client communications need to be recorded. So any communication, whether it's WhatsApp, LinkedIn, or similar, needs to be recorded. And I know we'll mention that later with regards to the compliance side. In terms of security, these channels are not being managed or reviewed in any way in some form. So there has been an adoption to solutions like ours where WhatsApp can be recorded. And primarily from the security perspective, making sure solutions that split the work and personal chats, because of course you don't want to be monitoring people's personal chats. You want to respect their privacy. So making sure that happens. And then in terms of the video channels and so on, there was a lot of, especially in the early days, we were seeing the photo and videos that were inadvertently being put on the internet or during calls, Zoom calls, where, as George was mentioning earlier, with whiteboards in the background, and obviously anything people have put on the whiteboard, it might be reference to a recent deal or a project that somebody's working on. And we heard a couple of times, one example, a lawyer threw the case fell through because it was actually, the details were on the whiteboard behind them. Similar to that, photos going onto LinkedIn, often with little Freddie or Johnny or Camilla at the trading terminal at home of mum or dad, and the background obviously was the trading terminal or the inbox, all with client information or confidential information. And none of this was being done maliciously, but of course inadvertently, and with the new change in working environment, you weren't sitting next to your compliance officer, or they weren't on the floor above, or wherever they sit. It was very much more, the barriers were down, so to speak. And so that, and then of course they get used for spear phishing, hacks and so on, in terms of generating access points into organizations.
Yes, I mean, yeah, it really has had to kind of required fund managers really think through pretty carefully and really understand it working, as you say. Just the fact that there could be something in the background, it could be a sensitive piece of information on a video call, separating the personal from the business in terms of chat tools and so on. George, before I go to Michael, we've all had to think about the whole, mobile device management. This isn't new, George, but the environment has changed. Have you had to evolve the discussion with your clients? Explaining?
Yeah, I mean, in what we do, it's about less so about monitoring and more about prevention with the technology that we're advising on. And I think that the evolution has just been this sort of decentralized cybersecurity approach. We quite rarely, as an MSP in our sector, have our own SOC team. and our own SIEM products, and we use AI quite heavily for the behavioral analysis. And so that has been in play for about 3.5 years now. So we were relatively lucky that this was a product that we'd rolled out to our clients before the lockdown hit. But obviously, if you're a traditional infrastructure designed for cyber and you're relying on a firewall in an office to protect all of your devices, then you're going to have to be running around pretty quickly to change your cyber strategy. And I think realistically, the topic is more now about endpoint device management, the security of it, using things like cloud app security to monitor where people are logging on from. You know, if you need to get an alert if someone's logging on from London and from somewhere in China at the same time. That's obviously not going to happen. Well, unless they've given their credentials out. So there's lots of controls that have just materialized in the off-the-shelf fashion of tools that we have. And I think the other educational point is around SOC services and remediation, because there's a lot of companies that offer security operations center services, which Michael mentioned as well, but they don't remediate. So it's great to be, and it's great to be gathering this data, but if you're not remediating as quickly as possible and stopping the breach in its tracks, you know, preventing further breaching, the service is not really that useful. So picking the right partners who can advise on this kind of stuff is really crucial. And I think that's an education that people have learned during the pandemic. I think people knew what SOC services were, they knew what endpoint detection was, they knew about behavior analysis, but it's the kind of after effects that people have learnt about. So I think that's been the main learning curve for people on the endpoint security pieces.
Right. I want to, Michael, how have you approached social media risks, if I can call them that, just in their many variations, just to again maybe expand on what Catherine and George have been commenting on there, and you know, how have you had to think about that perspective?
Yeah, I think, you know, from a firm policy perspective, we've had a pretty strict protocol against using most social media. You know, in limited capacity, we do obviously use like a LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn is a great example of something that, you know, you can use it as a great marketing platform. It's a great research tool and just a great business networking tool. We try to make sure that, you know, there's only a few people, if you strictly need it, we'll allow it. We won't allow the messaging aspects of it, but we will allow you to use it as a tool. I joked with Catherine last week that I'm very interested in having a conversation with her offline about her services. You know, as we look to see, you know, how the whole social media and business evolves. We don't really, as a firm, see the need to have people on their Facebook accounts or, you know, Instagram, etc. But I think as that world evolves, we'll definitely, you know, look to use tools to control that. You know, I think also, you know, from an endpoint protection, you know, we use strictly corporate devices. We don't have a BYO policy. We want to make sure that, you know, we manufacture the device for the employee with the right software on it to control it. We don't mix personal and business, you know, network/data at all for any of the employees, which I think is super helpful for me to manage, but also just from a protection standpoint. You know, we do a lot of what George mentions as well, like, you know, geo tracking. Anytime, you know, especially in this last year, as people just really kind of migrated home, or maybe they rented a house down in Florida, or they went, you know, vacation or travel. It was great to see the tools that we had in place show when people logged in, where they logged in from, and we can check up on that and make sure that that's not, you know, a bad actor of any sort.
Yeah. Especially important if these are new staff, new team members that you have. That introduces of a kind of level of caution, really, and making sure that you're comfortable that you know, people are who they really say they are, and that you're not
Sure.
introducing anyone into the firm that could be doing something nefarious. So I think the geolocation points, I think, are a really interesting one. I've got to bring Catherine in because we did have an take on this. I mean, one of the, Catherine, if we think about communication tools, I was reading recently that, and I'm sure the Morgan did a couple of commodity traders recently for using WhatsApp. There is a risk, Catherine, maybe that if management groups, put the brick on using social media, that it could lead to individuals using communication tools, in a offline kind of way, if you take my point, out circumventing the organization, and that then introduces compliance risk. And I mean, clearly, it was something Morgan Stanley took very seriously with the decision that they took. I suppose also it reflects the fact the world now, and in terms of how maybe, fund managers communicate with their investors, with their colleagues. I mean, what do you make of the potential compliance risk to this?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm going to take a slight step back because from our very early conversation with the FCA in 2015, when the social media regulation was being evolved, and what became very clear with an event we ran in the House of Lords was with the banks and the regulator was there was social media regulation, but there was also the regulation already in place, and actually that's almost the more relevant in most of these situations. So when looking at this from a compliance perspective, many of the conversations I have with our clients is, okay, so if we're looking at this in the way that fax converted to email, social media will be to email, as fax was to email, emails will be to social media. Basically, that same leap that we saw in the change of behavior will apply. And with that, there was a very clear definition when the regulators were asked if emails were considered written communication. And they replied yes. And at that point, the landscape shifted dramatically and very quickly. And it's similar, and the belief our clients have is that that's now the same lens that the regulators will be looking at LinkedIn and WhatsApp with. So in the UK, obviously that's CISO 10A with the FCA. In the US, the major one is Series 7 and 63 under FINRA, which many of the organizations sign when they probably work with George or similar firms, say, I agree that we record all conversations with our clients, not thinking that it might be the WhatsApp, LinkedIn conversations that are relevant to that exact point. And I think that's the shift that will become very apparent in the next year, especially as the regulators kind of get through the pandemic and back into building the reserves up.
How have you looked to strike the balance between allowing your staff to use maybe media communication tools, open source information, but striking the balance between keeping you safe but not also maybe finding your colleagues from working to the best of their abilities, as it were?
I think Nicolas missed the intro there because he was connecting again.
Yeah, indeed. So you were asking a question to me?
Nicolas, yes, I was just bringing you in here to get a sense of how you've looked to strike the balance there with allowing your colleagues to utilize communication tools, open source tools, to do their jobs, remaining as as secure And so there's a fine balance, perhaps, that you need to strike here.
No, definitely you have a kind of cost-benefit analysis that you have to run. I mean, I think Michael was touching upon it with LinkedIn. I mean, it's difficult to do marketing and institutional marketing without LinkedIn. But if you open LinkedIn, you have the messaging which goes with, and so you have to find where you should put the barrier, because if you prevent from using the messaging tool, I mean, it's less nice, I would say, to use it. So this is from the marketing angle. But, you know, from the IT fund managers angle, we work in a quantitative firm, and we use a lot, you know, of those open access libraries that you can have access to on the net. We use typically R as a language. And so those guys, they discuss with each other through Slack. But if you allow Slack, you allow a lot of potential data leakage and code leakage. But if you don't allow Slack, they will discuss together on their smartphone and possibly copy paste and find workarounds. And so if you're too stringent, not only you're less efficient in terms of working environment, but also people find workaround which can in turn generate new risks. So there is no obvious answer. And we try to find the fine line for specific people. We allow LinkedIn. For specific people, we allow Slack. For some others, we allow some specific channel. And then after, we try to make kind of this well housekept, you know, to have a kind of continuous control of who has which kind of right. It is a permanent supervision, I would say, that you have to run.
James, can I jump into Nicolas's point? Because I think Nicolas has just identified what has happened with the pandemic. Is behaviour is just changing rapidly, and what people are doing is changing, because often they're working on their own, and so suddenly they're like, hang on, why are we using Slack to talk to our colleagues? And it's just, and it's not kind of, hello compliance, may I do this? Because, well, sorry, compliance is miles away. So I think Nicolas is spot on, and actually, so we keep hearing this very point. And what's great about Slack, Zoom, is they have API feeds. So we literally plug them into our platform, the recording set up, and whatever channel that needs recording can be. And talking to the regulators about this, what does keep coming back, which we hold very firmly, and George's perspective on this would be interesting, is they want to see just best practice. They do realize that keeping up with every single channel, because there will be whack next in 2 weeks up that we've never overheard of, right? Yeah. And it's just about managing what you can manage to a point that's sustainable for the business. But obviously, again, to Nicolas's point, you only want to do it if it's going to grow the company. You want to choose the channels that allow your staff to be more efficient, effectively collaborating, and speak to clients in a productive way.
Absolutely. George, do you want a brief comment on that before I'd like to move on to got a lot of questions I'm going to get to.
I think from both points, you know, it's an element of risk management. You know, you've got to weigh up the risk versus reward, and if you allow people to use all of the products they want to use, you're probably going to have massive risks. You just got to manage those and mitigate those in the correct way as a business. But I think quite importantly, you have to show an element of trust in your staff, because if you don't show trust in your staff, they're not going to care about the company's data. So it's just getting that balance right.
Yeah, absolutely. It brings me to my next key area, which is training. And this gets talked about a lot, but nevertheless, I just want to refer briefly to just to kind of illustrate the point here, just to again show the world that we're living in today. I was just doing some research, just looking at some of the cyber attacks that took place last year, and the audience there was one particular hedge fund that ended up closing, Levitas Capital. Very brief, that was, I think, what's referred to as a business email compromise attack. Somebody inadvertently clicked on a Zoom invitation link, it installed malware. Is that the business email, send an email to their fund administrator to request a wire transfer, which succeeds. This is, and again, a sign of where these attacks are beginning to evolve and to exploit fund managers in this environment. And it does, to me, strike a chord that ongoing training is just absolutely vital. I'm going to go to this one, just being a fund of funds, Michael. What's your on how to navigate these threats and maybe the way that you look at the managers you allocate to?
Yeah, sure. Listen, we emphasize staff training and awareness 24/7, 365. You can't do enough of it, and you got to make it interesting. You got to make it fun so they understand the topics. You know, we've definitely shifted to more of a zero trust culture. You know, we also try to educate, you know, users at their home, right? Their home cyber hygiene, because obviously that affects their profile out on the internet, which ultimately affects our security. You know, some of the attacks that you describe, right, is a lot of people are really reverse engineering off of social media to try to figure out a way to get you to attract and click on that link. You know, so we spend a lot of time, you know, we use phishing, you know, exercises once a month now, where we used to have them a couple times a year. Now it's just continuous. But I think the other thing that we really do is really train the staff how to recognize, you know, that just surprise email that pops up out of nowhere that might use our CEO's name, or maybe somebody, they'll learn off of LinkedIn and other, you know, your corporate website, what the structure is. And they will make it sound attractive to click on a link and maybe, you know, ask for a wire transfer or something like that. So we're constantly working with our staff. It has absolutely increased the volume of help desk emails we get. You know, a lot of them are just false, right? It's like, hey, this looks like a spam. Could you check this out? Which we don't mind. We'll do that all day long. Yeah. I think that's a good sign for me that the culture has changed. I think people should be paranoid. Like I said, we're really, you know, we don't want anybody just randomly opening up something. And then to that end, we focused, I think George pointed out before, right? We really focus on endpoint protection. Somebody's going to click something, you know, it's inevitable. You know, and when that happens, we want to make sure we have a containment software at that point, and then the alert and the remediation that happens immediately after.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the other thing I'd point out too, like on a softer side, right? I think from our culture, you know, our CEO Tracy Stewart last year really came up with the idea, and we really pushed this whole cyber governance, right? So we've got, you know, quarterly meetings that coincide with our business risk in parallel to ensure that top-down approach is taken and everybody's educated, everybody's trained, and we are making the right investments, you know, to protect us and our clients.
Yeah, the point there about cyber risk really is business risk. I think that's absolutely vital.
Yes.
George, is it a case of keeping training regular and relevant, not just an hour where your whole enterprise are kind of bombarded with, you know, a day's worth of training and you know, it doesn't stick? Just do it regular and relevant, and it's more likely that these best practices will start to be embedded into the culture of the firm.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I'm imagining trying to get some of my clients on a whole day's cyber training. I think everyone would be having their second vaccine that day. I think Michael's point about risk committees and the governance of it is vital, because there's levels of training, right? And you have to train the board. They have to understand the importance of mitigating risks from a cyber perspective. And it has to be, you know, leading by example in that respect. If they're not doing the cyber training, none of the staff are going to bother doing it. I try and encourage my clients to do as much training on the products and technologies they use as well, because there's so many breaches that happen because people are using the technology they have wrong. You know, if you're in a small or a large firm, but you're using SharePoint for collaboration and you're accessing files through Teams, if someone's adding someone to that Teams channel that shouldn't have access to the SharePoint site, which links to the files, then someone will see it. You know, there's all of this kind of basic education that people need in the technology. Yeah. I also think from a training perspective, especially phishing, as soon as a new joiner joins, it should be the first thing they do. Because so many organizations, larger ones especially, do not do it regularly enough. And they're joining firms like our clients, you know, people on this call with sub 100 users. If someone's coming from a big bank, I can guarantee you they're not going to get the same level of training as they'll get in some of the firms we work with. And so as soon as someone joins, it should be part of the induction process, not just on a regular basis. And then I think the last point about training is really just making sure that people understand that it's a good thing to shout about things where they think something's wrong. You know, as Michael was saying, you just got to let the IT team know, you know, let each other know. Don't forward the email you think's rogue to another employee, because then they might click on it. But tell the IT team, because the more information they have, the more they can prevent in the future. We had a client that joined us who had been in a similar situation that you mentioned. So just as they signed to join up to us, I was on a call with the CEO and he went, "We just had a cyber breach. I wish we'd done this a month ago." And someone basically clicked on a phishing email, which had automatically created a forward rule in their mailbox. So every email that person had sent for the last month, it had been sending it to a Gmail account. And the IT company that was looking after them had no alerting to outside emails, to Gmails or anything like that. So you can train people, but you have to have the ability to alert on it. As Michael said, there's a certain level you can do, but you have to be able to react fast.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that? It often does come. Kind of inevitable that it's going to happen, but I guess again, there's just different ways that you know, firms are going to approach this.
As you say, you have this kind of same curse as the one you have in the physical world. I mean, you can have a very strong front door, and then you have a kid who's forget to close the window in the backyard, and so you can be very strong, very smart, very solid, but just somebody forget to close something which looks innocuous. And you know, we run some mock cyber attacks. And I mean, somewhere, somehow, we were safe, but, and there is some but, you know, in a rush, we had to open a new IP address just for a broker who has changed his IP network. And then, you know, in the list of authorized IPs, you add up just one because you have to send your orders, and then you forget that you've done that, or you forget to iron it afterward, or you are in a situation where you absolutely have to send something to somebody, and your IT team say, okay, just for that one, and they can forget after to roll back to the initial situation. And so what I mean by that is the alerts we had were just people forgetting that they have done something, a workaround, and forgetting to correct it afterward. And so it's all a kind of combination of what you said. They need to be aware of how important it is, and you need to be aware of not only looking at the front door, but looking basically everywhere. And the only way to do it is permanent control and continuous control of what you do, I guess.
Yeah, and Catherine, you know, if say approach
to cyber risk, you know, that slightly fatalistic attitude that, you know, it will never happen to me, or, you know, smaller a business, we're not going to be on the radar of anybody. I mean, the risk there, of course, not just the financial risk, but it's reputational risk. I just wonder, from your point of view, Catherine, whether you feel that there are any bad habits that you've seen, not purely just in respect of management groups, but just across all of your clients, that you feel are still prevalent, you know, do need to be addressed?
Well, I think one example that we were told by a client that was coming on board is the CEO got a stalker on his lawn, and they couldn't work out how this particular stalker had ended up on his lawn, and he ran, and it was actually an oil company. And what had happened is his assistant had taken a photo of a bunch of flowers she'd been sent by her boyfriend, so she was really excited about these bunch of flowers. It was at the time when people were still working in the office. So she was at her desk, her computer was behind her, and her boss's calendar was up. He had a meeting at home the following day. And when she took the photo of the flowers, she was also adding in an appointment for the next day where someone was meeting the CEO at his home. So she put in the address to invite the other person. And of course, and then she posted that photo on Instagram. This stalker had been trying to track the CEO for a couple of years by that point, and realized through LinkedIn that she was the PA for the CEO. Through LinkedIn, he found her Instagram handle because she tagged a few things back and forth, and as a result started following her on Instagram. So saw the photo, ended up on the individual's lawn. The point of that, slightly long story, is with to Michael's point, the governance meetings are so critical because continually what's interesting, it's just the shift of communication leaking that we're not always aware of. And so, and what we find, we do a lot of online training, and we make them, we often get asked for animations. People seem to quite like animations and respond well to them, as well as actually using real life examples, because then people can relate to it. And often we'll use an example of something that happened in the organization, take the names out, remove anything that makes anyone feel too bad, but it can say, like, you don't, to your point, James, you don't think you're going to do this because X, Y, and Z. However, it did, one of your colleagues, or this did happen inside this company 6 weeks ago. So, and this was the consequence. And I think quite often the consequence isn't focused on enough. So people don't necessarily realize that by posting a photo on Instagram with a bunch of flowers on it, you're allowing a stalker to your boss's house. Like, how, like, if you say that, maybe most people would say, like, how? Like, really, what? Whatever, you know? And it's the trail and people understanding the behavior and then the consequence of the behavior from that we find in our training is the most powerful. And keeping it short, to George's point. Or have we lost our chair?
Short and humorous.
Yes, short and humorous. We've got one that, I think James is frozen. We've got one that's where an individual got fired literally at the end of the training. She was fired later that day, and everybody just starts laughing because they think it's, and it is a good point, you know, kind of making it aware enough.
We used to do a lot of phishing training using Kevin Mitnick's ones, and originally they were good because it was new, but after a while people just kind of switched off. It's not the most engaging.
Right.
If you don't have humor in it, it doesn't engage people at all.
Yeah.
And I think that is an area that will probably improve quite heavily over the next 12 months, as well as James's connection.
Sorry, guys, I think I lost you there for a moment. But no, the consequences you point to, Catherine, are important that people think about this. And, you know, yeah, these are the risks now, that blurring of the lines now that we've all lived through with the house and the office, the work, the personal. Yeah, this opens up almost Pandora's box, and there are real risks to this. Good story that you shared there, Catherine. I've got two questions. I've got 4 minutes here left to finish this panel. I do want to get a sense, Michael, I'm going to go with you to start with. Do you see the potential to help with cyber risk within your organization, within the industry at large? Big question, but a short view from you on that?
Absolutely. I think it's too much data and it's too overwhelming, because you're using multiple tools to really configure and just monitor. So to me, I think AI is critical, for now and the future, to really see the patterns, see them as they develop, and get ahead of an attack as it's forming. So I think it's essential.
Yeah. Nicolas?
Yes, definitely. You can call it AI, or you can call it a dashboard, or you can call it data collection and monitoring, because it's not that smart at the end. It's just that you have a wealth of data, every second, and you need to make sense out of them. And so how can you do that? Look at an internet traffic. I mean, it's very difficult to make sense and information out of it, to make data out of the connection of your teams, just to have them somewhere to monitor them, to have an idea of whether 100 or 1,000, which is an abnormal figure. So you need to figure out this kind of series of rules and then put them into practice, and then have a kind of dashboard so that people can just have a look and whether it's red or green, and to attract their attention. But it cannot be read every day, everywhere, because you forget about it. So it has to be well calibrated. So yes, there is definitely a tremendous challenge for the coming 10 years on that matter.
And George, it's quite of how you're evolving your offering, your support to your clients, especially again when you've got these issues of not really see people that you're working with, and that could lead to unintended consequences, data leakage, and so on.
Yeah, I think it's about the accuracy of the exception reports, isn't it? If you think about traditional SOC services companies, they would have 2,500 people sat in a call center somewhere just monitoring firewall logs. It's just not efficient. It's not a sustainable business model. As these products become commoditized, they're just going to be pushed out of the market because it'll be too expensive. Yeah. So we use AI to monitor the machine learning outputs of the behavioral analysis, the EDRs, the MDRs that we're monitoring from a cyber risk perspective for clients. But the other two areas that are becoming really prevalent on AI, which I know I'm deviating slightly from topic, is we also use it to monitor the performance of the applications our clients are using. So with hedge funds specifically, always traditionally you have these big modeling spreadsheets, and people have add-ins for Bloomberg and other products, and Excel crashes when it starts to struggle. And so from an end user experience perspective, we use some AI tools to actually monitor the performance of the application before it crashes, so that we can fix it in the background, which results in a better end user experience, which is why we called it that. But the other things about the kind of ESG and what as a technology firm we can do to help our clients from that perspective. And it's about using that data from a behavioral analysis and the AI again to help give the partners of the firm information about how productive their staff are being, but also to help achieve good work-life balance for people. So notify HR if someone's actually been using Excel heavily for the last 18 hours. That person's probably not going to last long if they keep doing that every day for the next 3 months, unless they're me, apparently. That's allowed. But it's about using it to help the firms perform better, but to get the accuracy of the exception reports. That's the key thing. That's where it's going to help.
That's good. That's a good George.
Concluding question.
I could literally run out of time. I mean, I could speak to you for many more hours on this topic. But Catherine, just any final thought from you on getting in touch? Although, Catherine, with this social media age, and especially with younger staff joining hedge funds, you really have got to be careful that any reputational risks are really headed off as early as possible here, and staying safe.
Yeah, and from a personal perspective, it's be careful, yes, but also it's such a huge opportunity. It does enable a far better ability to communicate with so many of the clients and potential clients that you work with. But actually, I think it's very exciting. But to your point, James, and to George's point, it's just about managing that risk and doing it. And that's what we're trying to do, is just make it one single platform that does them all, that does the training, so it does the prevention as well as the alerting and management and the archiving. So, and I think that's the way we'll begin to see things moving forwards, is much more simpler, holistic ways to manage all of the social media channels that are out there and needed.